The year is 1993, and whoomp, there it is. This was the year when Hulk Hogan became Mr. Nanny, the Atari Jaguar roared into store shelves, and the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers proved that sometimes all you need is some clever editing to make a hit TV show. But we're not here to talk about Rita Repulsa's awesome hair, because today we're counting down Electronic Gaming Monthly's worst reviewed games of 1993. It's Morphin time. The name Takara might not mean much to you, but there was a time when it was synonymous with inexpensive Neo Geo ports on 16-bit consoles. Critics were understandably skeptical that the company responsible for creating the Microman toy line could shrink a 24-bit arcade game down to a 1 meg cart. But lo and behold, Takara pulled it off and managed to prove everybody wrong with a solid port of Fatal Fury on the Super NES. In just a split second, EGM became believers. And just as fast, the Sega Genesis game came in and stomped all over that optimism. I liked the Super NES version of the game and really expected the Genesis copy to be equally good, starts Steve. Unfortunately, the moves are very difficult to do, and in this type of game, split-second timing is very important. Sushi X was even harder on the game, complaining that it's nearly impossible to play with a standard Genesis D-pad. Ed was the most generous of the bunch, giving a 5 and praising the great backgrounds and good animation, while joining the chorus about the disappointing gameplay. All this negativity ended up averaging out to a disappointing 4 out of 10. After years of sticking with the tried and true 4-person review crew, Electronic Gaming Monthly decided to shake things up, starting with their 50th issue. With so many great games coming out, the magazine chose to bring on a 5th critic to cover some of the overflow. This meant that instead of 4 people talking about the same game, we saw Major Mike tackling all of the games by himself. And that's quite a load, as some of the issues had him talking about 25 or 30 games in a single month. That's not easy to do, even when all you have to do is write a paragraph. One of the games he briefly touched on was Incredible Crash Dummies, a Super NES game from the notoriously bad publisher LJN. Mike complained that the concept was never appealing, with the 16-bit version underlying all of the flaws. The side-scrolling, survive-the-levels type game is cute at times, but the poor controls and mandatory cheap hits by enemies ruin things. He thought there were some cute ideas there, but not enough to make it worth recommending. Incredible Crash Dummies managed to score a crushing 4 out of 10. But don't feel too bad, because these dummies know a thing or two about getting crushed. After seeing the success Capcom had with games like DuckTales and Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, it felt like every publisher needed to snap up a nationally televised cartoon series to sell to kids. That might explain why Atlas decided to adapt Rocky and Bullwinkle, an influential series that had been off the air for nearly 3 decades. But even if the Moose and Squirrel duo had been relevant in 1993, that still wouldn't have made this poorly designed Genesis game any good. Mike feels my pain. Double ugh. He argued that the 16-bit port is almost a carbon copy of the NES version, with the poor controls intact. He concluded that the variety of games is nice, but the whole thing looks rushed. Sadly, that's a knock against most cartoon games of that era. Capcom may have struck gold with the Disney Afternoon, but they were the exception to the rule. Holy smokes, Rocky and Bullwinkle's score is a 4 out of 10. You know how Persona 5 is a great game and you're looking forward to all of those just announced spin-offs? Well, keep those fond memories of Atlas close by, because the company that recently gave us Rock of Ages 2 is on the list of terrible games for the 2nd time. Yeah, Atlas still had a few years to go before they got their act together. Super Widget is the 16-bit sequel to Widget, an NES game that Electronic Gaming Monthly didn't even bother to review in 1992. Mike noted that a small purple critter with a big punching fist that can change into mutated forms may be more geared for the little ones. Besides, what's a widget anyway? Look, I agree the game is bad, but Widget is clearly an alien from another planet. Why didn't you just read the instruction manual, Mike? Faux ignorance aside, EGM gave Super Widget a less than stellar 4 out of 10. When you hear the name Electronic Arts, chances are you immediately think of the never-ending parade of annual sports games, the increasingly chaotic Battlefield games, or maybe even The Sims. But there used to be a time when EA was full of new ideas. Those early days gave us Zany Gull, Sword of Sodan, Budokan, Starflight, and King's Bounty, all games that feel a million miles away from where EA is today. Unfortunately, not all of their original IPs are worth remembering, which brings us to Risky Woods, the second worst reviewed game of 1993. This adventure game was ported over from the PC, and the EGM editors made sure to let you know. This is the type of game you'd expect when you port over a computer title onto a system with high standards for action games, explains Martin. Steve echoed those thoughts. Put some nice computer graphics and swell computer gameplay into a cart and your Sega can play like a computer. Instead of getting hung up on the graphics, Sushi X unloaded on the game, bashing it as corny and plagued by horrendous play control. He concluded that this is the kind of game we saw 2 years ago. That may be true, but those games weren't any better in 1991. Risky Woods couldn't see the forest for the trees and averaged a mediocre 4 out of 10. While the rest of the list may be locked in a bloody 5-way tie, I think it's safe to say that 1993 had a clear loser. Forget about shoddy Neo Geo ports and generic platformers based on 1960s cartoons, because the worst game of the year was Swamp Thing by THQ. Based on the animated series and built on the same game engine that gave us Bart vs. the Space Mutants, Swamp Thing is everything bad about licensed games wrapped up into one barely playable package. Martin decided to start his review by referencing Ren and Stimpy. Choppy choppy, sob sob. He complained that not even Swamp Thing can save this poor example of 8-bit technology, and fans of the movie will be very disappointed, as will anybody who buys this cart. Steve noted the graphics and animation are substandard, with detail playing a secondary role in the visual department. This could have been cool, he concluded, but this effort definitely looks rushed. For his part, Sushi X still seemed a little bitter about the 1992 handheld version. The game doesn't belong in the Game Boy, let alone the NES. While I agree that Swamp Thing is garbage, the Game Boy is a great little system that was home to a lot of fun games. Don't be a dick, Sush. Swamp Thing managed to average a pitiful 3.75 out of 10. Swampy deserves better. Hey, thanks for watching us counting down the worst reviewed games of 1993. So here's the question of the day. What's your least favorite game of that year? 1993 had a lot of terrible games that didn't even make this list. Like Super James Pond, Toys, Family Dog, those Make My Video games on the Sega CD, and Wayne's World. Oh, you can't forget about Wayne's World. Let me know your pick in the comments below. In other news, I'm hard at work on a bunch of new reviews, including Hob, Pinball Effects 3, Distrust, and Senko no Ronde 2. We still have a lot of week left, so I recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.